Hey guys, MetalJesus here. Now over the weekend I was playing a lot of PlayStation Vita games. I love that handheld, so many great games for it. But then I was like, well, why don't I hook it up and play on my big screen TV, because I do have a PlayStation TV. And for those that don't know, the PlayStation TV is basically just kind of a stripped down PlayStation Vita, but has HDMI out and also supports an external controller and plays a lot of Vita games on a big screen TV. And as I'm playing Vita games on my TV, I look over and I see the mClassic. Now, normally the mClassic is connected to my docked Switch, but I got to thinking, I was like, what would it look like if I plugged the mClassic into the PlayStation TV? What would it do to my Vita games? Now, if you're not familiar with the mClassic, it is a small, self-contained, external video processor designed to basically upscale and improve the graphics on an entire generation of gaming systems. And so by simply plugging it into a console, it'll upscale the resolution to either 1080p or 4K, plus it does a bunch of video processing. So it'll sharpen the image, it also sometimes adjusts the color, it'll add smoothing to polygons. It's a pretty interesting device. That's why I actually use it on my Switch, because it upscales quite nicely on there. And so like I said, I got to thinking, what would this do if I plugged this into this and then ran a bunch of Vita games? Let's take a look. This is Need for Speed Most Wanted, and I captured this footage straight out of the PlayStation TV to the Elgato, and essentially it's running in the original 720p resolution. I didn't artificially upscale it like I normally would in Final Cut. And then here is the game with the mClassic plugged in. So here we're getting a full 1080p, as well as some nice video tweakings and perks. And then here's the footage side by side, the one on the left obviously being the native 720p, the one on the right 1080p. And normally I would try to get the exact footage, but there is a day-night cycle in this game, so it is kind of tough to get the lighting exactly the same, but you can see the difference here. And now let's go ahead and take a look at Borderlands 2. The footage on the left is the native footage, but I have blown it up so that it's roughly the same size as the mClassic footage, which is on the right. I've also slowed down the footage to 50% to make it a little bit easier to compare. And then let's go ahead and pause on this frame right here. On the left, you have the normal footage, and you compare it to the mClassic on the right, and a lot of things become obvious here. So there's obviously some anti-aliasing going on, especially when you look, say, on the edges of the creature. Also notice, though, that there is a bit more contrast and possibly more saturation on the mClassic side, but not enough so that it's annoying. I actually think that it looks pretty good. And to me, the mClassic footage just looks more cleaned up, looks more pleasing to the eye. Now, part of that's because on the left, the normal footage, well, I'm having to scale that from 720p up to, 1080p to make it equal. And so, yeah, it's just not quite as sharp, especially around the text there where it says "my eye." When you compare the two, the one on the right is just a little bit more defined, a little bit easier to read. And one of the real benefits of using the mClassic is that it doesn't add any noticeable lag. They have some measurements on their website, and other people have done measurements, and it's pretty much a non-issue, which is great, because a game like Borderlands 2 kind of runs kind of bad on the Vita, to be honest. It has low frame rate to begin with, and so you wouldn't want to introduce more lag and worse frame rate in this game. But I do think it's a good example of this mClassic adding something to it, because this game already has that kind of cartoony look, and I think actually it looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Killzone Mercenaries, and again, I've slowed down the intro here to 50% just so it's a little bit easier to tell, because with some of this footage it can be kind of chaotic and you really want to take your time to look. But you'll notice on the right, the mClassic, again, has a little bit more color depth, a little bit more contrast. I think it looks more pleasing to the eye, but yet it's not completely overblown. One way that I can tell that in most cheaper devices that try to do this sort of, upscaling or whatever, is that the reds will look really red, almost to the point where they kind of stand out and don't look right. And so it's nice that the mClassic doesn't do that. I think it actually is pretty pleasing to the eye. And then here is Sonic AllStars Racing Transformed. This is, well, I'll be honest with you, just another excuse to play this awesome game. It's one of my favorite racing games of all time, and the Vita version is excellent. And so here we have the normal output, and then we're going to switch over to the mClassic. And you can tell that it just gets sharper, but that's because obviously it's running at 1080p, which is what this video is. But, you know, the colors pop. It looks good. And then there's a little bit of, you know, the anti-aliasing that's happening on the polygons and some of the edges. And you can make the argument that, you know, and I'm with you on this, that I don't hate edges on older games like this, but it is nice that you can play it like this, and it's almost just like a, you know, a quote-unquote free upgrade. And then I wanted to see what it would do against some 2D games, or at least mostly 2D games. And so I started with Bastion, actually, and this is a great version of this game. This is the normal version of it here. And again, it's running at 720p, but I'm having to blow it up a little bit so that it's filling the frame. And then let's go ahead and switch over to the mClassic. And I think it looks pretty good. Now, I think this game is mostly 2D sprites, but you can tell that it's not changing the game in radical ways to where it's not pleasing. And again, you're getting a little bit of that better color saturation and better contrast. And then here is Skyforce Anniversary, one of my all-time favorite shooters, shoot 'em ups. I actually played this game so many hours on the Switch, and the Vita version is excellent. Now, this is a top-down shooter, but it uses also a lot of polygons. And so you're kind of getting a mix of both worlds here, and the mClassic is doing that. Actually, I think it looks extremely good here. I think it actually enhances the game quite a bit. Not that I don't like how the game originally looks. I mean, it looks and runs fantastic, obviously, on the handheld. But when you're coming over to your big HDTV, having this footage upscaled to 1080p plus the additional, you know, color enhancements, things like that, and the anti-aliasing, yeah, this is probably the way I would normally play. Anyways, guys, that's a quick look at me running some PlayStation Vita games through the mClassic. This is really just because I was curious to see what would happen, and I wanted to share it with you guys. I thought it was kind of a neat little test. Now, one of the things that I couldn't get it to do, and I don't think it supports it, is I couldn't get it to upscale to 4K. And I don't know why. I mean, there's only so many buttons on this thing. Nothing has a set to 4K option to it. Not a huge deal, because I think it still looks pretty good, but I know that the mClassic can go to 4K. I think it just depends on the specific type of input that it's getting from the device. But anyways, love to know what you think down in the comments below. Do you have an mClassic? Do you have a Vita? Have you ever considered doing this? And are there other maybe classic systems you'd like to see these compared side by side? Let me know. All right, guys. Well, thanks very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.